Good evening, whakalahiatu, and welcome to tonight's bulletin of BCN News. Leading the news tonight, Premier Tangilangi today says that the government is working towards a Niue government-owned superannuation scheme for Niue public servants as well as those in the private sector. In November last year, BCN News first reported that more than 100 public servants are working without superannuation since the last government scheme closed in 2015. The only employees covered by a superannuation scheme are those of the government. Those working in the private sector do not get superannuation cover. Since then, the government has embarked on a feasibility study and have asked the technical assistance of the Asian Development Bank and New Zealand government to find a national scheme which will also include coverage for the private sector employees. In a statement to BCN News, the Public Service Commission says that they will advocate very strongly to the new government to set up a new national superannuation scheme to cover both the public service employees and those in the private sector. The Commission says that they had been through different super schemes in the past, such as the ASB, the Government Superannuation Fund, and the National Provident Fund. The Public Service Commission is concerned with the situation affecting the employees of the public service, and they will continue to advocate to the government to invest into a Niue-owned superannuation scheme going forward. Domestic or family violence is one of the least reported crimes in Niue, which is attributed in part to a culture of silence. This week, one man is in custody awaiting trial for assaulting a family member. The Chief of Police, Timothy Wilson, told BCN News today that the low reporting of domestic violence is a worldwide issue and not just here in Niue. This year, the police dealt with 2 incidences of domestic or family violence and prosecution of those cases. This week, a man remains in prison awaiting trial for assaulting a family member.
We don't have very good statistics on domestic violence here in Niue, and part of the reason why is because it's probably the most unreported crime in anywhere in the world, but even here in Niue. And so because of that, we really don't know how often it's occurring. We can tell you that we've had a couple cases this year that have come before us that have been reported to us. We've investigated those and prosecuted on all of those cases. We just had an arrest this week, and we have somebody currently housed at the prison farm who was arrested also for assaulting a family member.
According to the chief, there is no specific domestic violence law in Niue, so all family violence cases and offenders are charged with common assault under the 1966 Niue Act, which is the same law they use to prosecute people who fight in nightclubs and bars.
It's important to understand that we don't have a law on domestic violence in Niue. So the statute that we use, or the legislation we use, is just the assault statute. So we would investigate it like we would any other assault case, whether it happened at a bar or anywhere else. The one thing that is different is under our standard operating procedures, we have a zero tolerance for domestic violence. So that means if we go to a scene and somebody has assaulted a family member, then there's no leeway that person is taken to the prison farm and housed at the prison farm.
Because of the absence of a domestic violence law, the police says that ensuring a successful prosecution is highly dependent on the evidence of the incident.
It depends on the evidence available to us at the time. So if we get there and we see marks on the face and we can clearly see that there's evidence that we can collect at the time to make a successful prosecution without the victim's willingness, then we will continue with that case. If we get there and somebody says, yeah, I slapped her, and it's only verbal and there's no other evidence, and both parties say, yeah, that's what happened, and then the victim drops out, it's very difficult for us to prosecute. So if we have sufficient evidence to proceed without the victim, we will proceed without the victim.
The police encourage anyone that if this is happening to you, to contact the police straight away. Do not wait for the next morning, but call them straight away or call 999 or 015 after working hours.
Well, the police message on gender-based violence is it's completely unacceptable. That we just won't stand for it. It's hard. These are of a long time in a lot of cultures been determined to be family issues and not criminal issues, are not something that the government should be weighing into. But our goal is to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure here in Niue, and that includes women and children, and sometimes men as well that are abused by their spouses. But what we do know about gender-based violence or family violence is that it's generally cyclical. And if we don't stop the chain somewhere, it's going to continue for generations and generations. And so we want to stop that cycle, and we want to stop the chain of events that takes it into different generations. So it's important to us, and we want to stop it, and we want the community's help to stop it as well. I will mention that most times when we have a domestic violence, alcohol is involved. And so one of the things we can do as a community and as a nation is use alcohol more responsibly, and that would
24 passengers arrived on yesterday's flight from Auckland and 12 departed the island. They will be in quarantine in Auckland for the next 14 days. According to the Disaster Management Office, which coordinates quarantine requirements for all travellers, of the 24 arriving passengers from yesterday's flight, 2 of them were approved for home quarantine. The rest of the passengers will be in quarantine at the Matawai Resort and the Matawai Apartments at Home Office. There is only one more passenger flight this side of Christmas, the flight arriving on the 14th. Passengers arriving on that flight will spend their Christmas Day in quarantine, but will be out in time for the New Year's celebrations. And Niuean families in New Zealand and Australia will be enjoying the Nuentaro for Christmas this year, thanks to 2 newly established businesses exporting taro. One is Havaka Niue Limited, which exports taro to New Zealand, and Moe Produce, based in Melbourne, Australia, which exports Nuentaro to New Zealand as well as Australia. Moe Produce, based in Melbourne, Australia, sent their container of frozen taro on the last boat. And according to one of the partners, Siala Mangotungia, the container arrived into Auckland on the 16th of November. Siala told BCN News yesterday that there are port congestions in Auckland and they have had to try alternative freight options, so their consignment of frozen taro will arrive Australia sooner. Moe Produce supplies frozen Nuentaro to 4 states in Australia, to Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia. Yesterday morning at Sir Robert's Wharf, more than 500 sacks of taro were loaded into a 20-footer freezer container bound for Auckland. BCN News spoke to Brad Ikinepule of Havaka Niue Limited.
Yeah, so today we're finalizing the container. According to our tally and calculations, we'll go over the 500 sacks originally required. So we'll go over about 513. It's okay. I can do what I can to sell the 13 sacks, which means those growers that are late coming into the party will have to wait just a little bit longer till I sell those sacks. And the growers, half or the majority of the growers have already been paid, which is good for them and also good for me. But it is a very long process.
Havaka Limited will also be exporting 10 boxes of frozen wahoo fish and boxes of lupe niue banana chips on this boat. Ikinepule says that they pay the grower $5 per kilo, so a 20 kilogram sack of taro will earn a local grower $100. This container will be arriving Auckland on the 17th of December, just in time for the Christmas umu. BCN News understands that one of the largest payments to a local grower last week was for $3,000. That lucky grower, that lucky taro grower to get more than $3,000 extra money this Christmas. That's wonderful news. And that's our news for tonight. Join us again for our bulletin in Wangahau Niue. Until then, good night.